Well, good day, my friends. We are in middle America today, in Illinois specifically, and we are going to a small town that Dick Van Dyke and his brother Jerry were raised in. We're going to go to his childhood home. I have all kinds of great stories from Dick's comical book, autobiography about his life that he tells about growing up here. I'm excited to see this place. I don't know what it looks like now, but this was his family home that he got to live in for free because he said that his grandpa owned a market in town and owned the house. So his parents got to live there for free and got free food. Let's go see where Dick Van Dyke got his start. Daze with Jordan the Lion and you all begins now. Katie had to fly out today, but John and I are off to our next adventure, and we're gonna get back to California. A lot more videos to show you guys from there. It's not often that I get to see a buzz bomb while I'm out driving around the country, so I gotta stop and admire him when I can, right? I don't know about you guys, but Dick Van Dyke has always been one of those people ever since I was a kid and ever saw him in anything from Mary Poppins, Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, the Dick Van Dyke Show. From the moment you see him, you love him. There's something about him that is so disarming and so friendly and likable and jovial and quick-witted and just, I don't know. I guess maybe part of it is that he said he used to spend a lot of his days growing up in the movie theater watching Buster Keaton, Charlie Chaplin, and Laurel and Hardy, and he said he had a particular affinity for Stan Laurel and felt like he adapted a lot of his mannerisms and could go into Stan Laurel at the drop of a hat. And I always felt that same way about Stan Laurel. As soon as I would see him on screen, I liked him. So let's go see where Dick Van Dyke actually grew up, and his family was kind of wacky. Well, here we are, Danville, Illinois, home of astronaut Joseph Tanner. Also Dick Van Dyke and Jerry Van Dyke. How are you gonna leave them off? Come on now. Like you said, he's almost 100. He says he's swirling the drain, but he's still got all of his faculties and he's still out working, so give the guy his respect. Here I found a street sign of him. Dick would say growing up that he remembered all the roads made of brick during the Great Depression. I was getting scared because I saw this and I was like, oh no, I hope they didn't destroy his house, because the neighborhood isn't looking too great anymore. Wow, this is crazy to see his house. He said when he grew up here it was really safe. He said there was a rich side of town, a poor side of town, but there was no dangerous part of town. He said nobody would ever lock their doors, or they would leave their lights on and their doors unlocked, doors wide open, even when they went out, like when they would go out to movies and stuff. He said nobody had fences. He said everybody was friendly, and he said he could leave his house here and his both grandparents lived in the neighborhood. He said he had first, second, and third cousins all that lived in the neighborhood, so he could just walk anywhere and see one of his relatives. So he said his brother Jerry was a little bit more of a troublemaker because he was Dick's brother, but Dick starts out his book kind of telling a story about here. He said that when he was 17, he was washing dishes with his mom thinking about World War II because it was happening, and I said, you know, Mom, I'm gonna be turning 18 soon. I'm wondering if I should maybe, because I don't see myself as, you know, in the Army at the front, you know, front lines or anything. I'm thinking maybe I should join the Air Force. And she says, well, you're already 18 actually. And he was like stupefied. He said, I was looking out the window and I'm like, what? And she says, yeah, you were actually born premature and you had some complications, so you were in the hospital for a long time, and we just ended up having him change your birth certificate to match that. And then he told his grandmother Van Dyke that, and she said, bullshit. And he said, what? She said, who told you that story? He said, well, Mom did. She said, no, you were born out of wedlock. You were a love child. Apparently his father was a minor league baseball player and a musician. He'd play like clarinet. He said his dad couldn't read music, but he could play anything that you asked him to play, or anything that you hummed he could play. And he said his mom was a stenographer. They ended up getting together and she got pregnant, and in 1925 he said that was a scandal. So he said what his grandmother said was they took off to Missouri, had him, and then came back, and that was really the story. Now he said his mom was very absent-minded and his dad was a traveling salesman. So he said through the week we didn't see much of him, but everywhere he went people loved him. His name was Cookie. He said that wherever Cookie was, there was a good time. He said, but he wasn't real close to his sons. He could joke with them, but he wasn't the kind of guy you could have a serious conversation or a relationship like that with. Like, he would never say I love you or anything. But he said his mother was so absent-minded that one time she baked a ham here in the house, and they later found it in their dad's shirt drawer. And he said she also told him when he was 30 that when they first had him, they used to leave him in his crib inside here and go to the movies. And they would come back and he would be screaming his head off. And he's like, Mom, what were you thinking? She goes, I don't know. We were young. We didn't know any better. He's like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you would do something like that. And so he said he was 5.5 when Jerry was born. And he said Jerry, for a short time, lived with his parents in their room. And then they moved Jerry's crib into his room, and he was responsible. If Jerry woke up and was crying, Dick had to go and rock his crib and all that. And then he would become the babysitter a year later when he was 6, when the parents wanted to go run errands or go to the movies. He said, I would have to watch my brother. And he said, I remember hearing the creaks of the house and everything while I'd be watching him. I was only 6 years old. He said, I remember sitting on a milk crate inside the house with an axe, because I was scared to death and I was totally convinced that the house was haunted. And he said at 6 years old, when he signed up for kindergarten, his parents would give him 2 nickels. And he said, I would walk to the trolley and I would take the trolley to kindergarten 6 miles. Can you think of that? Sending a 6-year-old out 6 miles. And he said, I would take the trolley to school, and then I would use the nickel and I would take the trolley back home from school. And that was pretty much his life. He said he was growing up, he was a happy kid, but he didn't really apply himself in school much at all. So he didn't get very good grades. But he said, when I look back on it, my parents never even looked at my report cards. They always just assumed I was doing well. So he said he was very likable in school and everything. And while he was living in this house, he read the Bible for the first time all the way through. Said he didn't have a clue what he had read, didn't understand any of it, but his mother and grandmother were so proud of him they would tell everybody they knew that he read the Bible. And then he said for a short time, for like a year, when he was a freshman in high school, his dad tried a job in Crawfordsville, so they moved there for a year, but they didn't end up liking it, so they came back here. And when he got back here, he wanted to be a track star because he had started doing track in Crawfordsville. They found out he had a heart murmur, so he wasn't allowed to do that anymore. So he decided then he was going to become a minister, started walking around with the Bible everywhere. And then he said, I got bored with that because I didn't really know what was in the book. So he said, that's when I discovered the drama club, and that's when I started acting and deciding that that was going to be my career path, was I was going to try and be an entertainer. So he said from then on he would be in every play in school. He wasn't a great singer, so they didn't cast him as the lead and those kinds of things, but he said he was always the most popular kid in school, the president of his class. And then when he was 17 and all of his friends were getting jobs, he said they were all making $11 a week, but he applied for a radio station. It was a CBS affiliate, and it was only paying $8 a week, but he said it was also the coolest job in town. And since the war was going on, a lot of the DJs had been called off to the draft, so they really needed somebody. So he said they hired me, and I got to announce the news and play songs, and that's when I got into music. And he said my friends would come and dance in the lobby, so I get in trouble for having parties. But he said I accidentally made a mistake one night and played the wrong sound clip, and everybody thought there was like a big gigantic tornado or something coming through, and everybody was worried because they didn't even see clouds or a thunderstorm. And he's like, I had to spend the rest of the night assuring them that it was a mistake and that wasn't happening. Crazy to see his house still here after all these years. But like I said, his family, he said, wasn't rich by any means. In fact, he said his parents had to mortgage their furniture several times just in order to get by during the Depression. But I think it was his mom's family owned the grocery, and so they owned this house, so they got to live here free. They would get free food, and that's basically how they got by. He said that the family was always close. Jerry ended up getting thrown out of school for punching his principal after Dick had already graduated, and ended up having to drive 20 miles to another school just to be able to get his diploma. So we'll just take a quick look at the front door and the steps and everything, and what used to be Dick Van Dyke's home, childhood home. Piece of history. He lived here, he said, until 1947. So he was born in 25 and lived here till he went off to start his career in 1947. Now, much like I said, when he was 17, he was thinking about, you know, he didn't want to be drafted because he didn't want to be on the front lines in the Army, so he was thinking of the Air Force. And so that's eventually what he decided to do, was just do the Air Force. So he took all the written tests, and then he said the physical tests came down to, he didn't weigh enough. He weighed 135 pounds and he had to weigh 141. He said they weighed him 3 times because he was nervous every time they would weigh him throughout the day he would be losing weight. So he said he booked a hotel room, ate as many bananas as he could, drank as much water as he could, and came in and weighed exactly what they needed, and ended up, you know, being sent to Wichita Falls for his training. But he said when he did all the written tests there, he had 150 IQ, but he failed every single one of the military tests. They said that we don't even understand how that's possible. So they put him in the special forces, or special services, which basically meant that they sent him to become an actor. He was putting on theater productions, making sets, and then in that town they ended up having a TV studio that they wanted to get broadcasts out about the war and through the military. So they hired him to do that. So he said he pretty much had a really cushy job through all of that, which is all he was really equipped for. He said, I was not a good soldier. I barely ever had clean clothes because I'd always forget to do my laundry. And so when his time was up, he decided to come back here to town and got his old job back at the radio station and started doing that again. And I'm going to take you to what else he was doing here in town next. I wasn't sure where this was, and then I just passed it, so we kind of stumbled on it on accident. But this was part of Dick's life here. When he came back from the Air Force, he got his old job back at the radio station, but he also joined the local theater. The Catherine Randolph Theater here is the home of the Red Mask Players, and this is where he would do plays and things when he first came back. Been going since 1936. And while he was doing this and working the radio station job, he started an advertising agency here in town with his friend, and they would sell ads for his radio show, at least for a while, till his friend accepted a job in Chicago for another advertising agency. And Dick said, I was hurt, but I couldn't blame him, because really all we were selling were a few ads, and we pretty much tapped out the market, and there was nowhere to go up from what we were doing. So Dick would eventually end up following his lead and going off to Chicago for an audition. He ended up accidentally sleeping through the audition, so he didn't get to do that one. And then he went to an audition trying to be an announcer for a radio station, and he actually thought that TV coming into play would be the future of the business, so he was hoping to get hired by a TV station in Indianapolis, and they said he didn't have a folksy enough voice. So he ended up coming back here to town, and eventually a guy who was an actor in the theater said, hey, I have an audition in California. Do you want to do a comedy act with me, like a comedy duo? Dick said, without even thinking, all I heard was California and a new adventure, and I said, sure, I'll do it. I gave him my address, and he came and picked me up at the house the next day and off we went. He said he never auditioned me or anything. He liked my personality, and since I said yes, we did it. Think of a young Dick Van Dyke coming and going from these doors and the stage doors on the side. Always a very tall and very thin man his whole life. And he said when he was a teenager, barely 130 pounds, if that, and of course that almost stopped him from getting in the Air Force. But there's the stage door. So I'm glad it's still here, but it's in poor shape, and it looks like this probably would have been maybe a driveway at some time. But he says, you know, it all wrapped up, like we were just out there talking about him being in the local theater. He said when he got that offer to go to Los Angeles, he took it. And the last thing he remembers is the guy showing up here at his house, picking up right in front of the house here on the street, and he said, off we went to Los Angeles. What a crazy story. I wish we could get in there and look around, but it is, I mean, it's probably in such bad shape and disarray. I mean, everything in it's falling apart. I just kind of wonder who owns it. Like, if he still owns it. He's 98 years old now. It could have been a nice museum or something like that. He's a, you know, really nice, friendly guy and everything, so I'm sure he would have helped contribute and donate to it. But just to think of maybe all the days that he and the family would have sat out here on the porch talking, and what a character. Like I said, his father was always known to be a good time. He says, to this day, in the book, he says, I put in my will when my brother Jerry was having some health issues that if I died, he could have my organs. And I told him that, and he said, every day my brother Jerry calls me first thing in the morning, and when I answer, say hello, he says, ah, damn, you're still alive? What a sense of humor. And there's one last thing in town I want to show you guys that they memorialized Jerry and Dick in. As we make our way downtown, check out this cool mural memorializing Lincoln's speech from the Fithian home balcony. It says September 21st, 1858, Abraham Lincoln arrived the Wabash station in Danville. He was followed to the Fithian home by a parade and a company of his supporters. Later he spoke from the balcony of the home in his stocking feet to the people in the yard below. So there he is up there, and there's the home. Here's the Fisher Theater. This is one of the theaters that Dick would say he would come and watch movies all day long. Like I said, he loved Buster Keaton, Charlie Chaplin, Laurel and Hardy, and he said he would come in first thing in the morning on the weekends, and his parents would literally have to come and drag him out of here. He loved it so much. But if you go around the corner, which this is a very beautiful sign. I always love the old signage of theaters, and just to see like the old box offices and everything. Kind of surprised there's not more or anything really in his name. But if you go around the corner, they do have a great mural. You can see some celebrities of Danville on here. Now it's great because he actually grew up and knew Donald O'Connor in this town. What a pair. So here's Helen Morgan, Donald O'Connor, the great Gene Hackman, also a friend of his from school, Bobby Short. But right there in the middle, Dick Van Dyke and Jerry Van Dyke. That is clearly Jerry from his coach years, which I loved. Huge fan of him. I think he's hilarious. And then lovable Dick Van Dyke. This guy. I love it. He said when he came back after he was in the service, he started dating a girl that he knew pretty much his whole life going through school, named Marjorie. And he said, or maybe it was Margie, he said that she was dating somebody who was on the football and wrestling team and dumped them to start dating Dick. He said we'd be on a date inside of her house in her parents' living room, and he'd be out front screaming, "Van Dyke, get out here, I'm gonna bust you up." He goes, knowing he liked to fight, I never went out the front door. I always went out the back door. He never caught on. He didn't know what he wanted to do, but he said, I knew I wanted to get out. I wanted to get out of doing local theater and do something else, and he felt like TV was the way to go. And boy, were you right, my friend. God, the Dick Van Dyke Show is so great. So great. Everything he did is great. I remember watching Diagnosis Murder with my grandparents as a kid. Well, my friends, I hope you enjoyed our day in Danville today. I did. A lot of famous people came out of here, but today just wanted to talk about Dick Van Dyke because I've really been into these audio books and listening to the people that wrote the book read it, and I've been listening to his and just had to stop here and see what was left of his home, and boy, was that an understatement. Barely anything left. Not a great neighborhood at all, and I don't see it lasting much longer. It's abandoned, been broken into many times. TV legends. Have a great night, everyone, and goodbye.